So thanks everyone for joining the first webinar, hopefully the first of many, and a big thank you to Frank for himself available to do this. Appreciate that. So I'll start off with maybe Frank, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a writer. I'm based in Minneapolis, and I've done travel writing for a long time, and I have a book out called The Geography of Madness, and a couple of years ago I edited another book called Under Purple Skies, which is an anthology of poetry and essays about Minneapolis, and I've been in the travel writing for a long time. It was exciting to see something like VoiceMap come along, and I think I got introduced to it, or somehow. So Ian had a little bit of association with a website called World Hum that I was working for, and that maybe it was how our paths crossed originally.
No, that's Ian Mandy, who created VoiceMap this year, eventually, we're friends talking about.
Yeah, and so yeah, I had, like I said, done travel stories and travel writing for a long time, and VoiceMap just seemed like an interesting new way to kind of put those skills to work.
Okay, and then we reached out to you quite a while ago, and then I think that I know people are busy in that, and you while to see it's just joining that second. So this isn't your first tour, the Prince tour. This is actually your third tour. That I was looking. You published this tour and your second tour on the same day. But your first tour is in 2020, and maybe just give a little brief run through on that, and maybe how it's different from this. What made you decide to create more?
So that one. So I got an email from Gary asking, if I'd be interested in doing a VoiceMap tour, and I kind of looked at it and thought about it. I'm not, like, to be honest, very tech savvy, so it seemed complicated, but it also seemed interesting. And I spent a while trying to figure out where in Minneapolis it makes sense to do a tour, because Minneapolis is not like a huge tourist town. There's not obvious. There's a couple of places, but there's no like huge draw. And so I eventually thought a walk along the river would be cool, and you could do some interesting stuff and create kind of a fun experience for people. And to be honest, I didn't really know if people would buy it. I was a little bit skeptical, but I thought it would be a interesting exercise and something kind of fun to do, and a way to get some new skills that might be useful. And I put the tour together. It took a long time because I had to figure out, as a lot of you know, it's complicated because you have to map the route, then research, then write, then adjust everything, then record. And so it took a long time for me to figure that stuff out, but it turned out pretty well. And to my sort of surprise, people actually bought the tour and liked it, and I was really happy about that. And so then I just started thinking of other possibilities for the forum where you could do similar things in town. And because it's a different kind of experience than writing a travel story. And it just has, I don't know, the frame is different, and so you can do different stuff. And I thought, for a written story, you need more sort of a clear narrative that goes through. But for this, it can be a little more episodic. And so I thought, there's a place called Minnehaha Falls, which is a huge local tourist place in town, that I thought would be a good opportunity for that. And then obviously Prince. Everybody associates Prince with Minneapolis. And when Prince died in 2016, it was just like a huge event for the town, and even for like myself. I wasn't like the biggest Prince fan ever. I was more of like a normal Prince fan, having grown up in the 80s, and it was like the songs that was the soundtrack of our youth, as I said in the tour. But there's some definite sites that are associated with Prince that are kind of close in downtown Minneapolis, and so so I started looking into that, like what would make sense as far as the tour and the length and the distance and stuff. And there were three kind of obvious choices. One is the music wall, where Prince took some of his original like publicity photos. It's still there. It's this big wall that has sheet music on it. Lizzo did a video in front of it. It's pretty iconic. And then First Avenue also is the club where Prince played in Purple Rain, and everybody knows that club and everybody associates it with him. And it's kind of, a lot of people thought that he owned the club, which he didn't. But and then the third one is the Dakota nightclub, which is down there in the same area where he went a lot and had a table reserved for himself. And he went there like just a few days before he died, actually. And so kind of starting with those three things, I looked in, found some other points and that made sense to that you could walk to. And then like I was telling Gary, for my tours, I mean, I guess probably everybody does this, but I have like one list of like geographical points that kind of have to be where they are, and then another list of like topics or things that don't need to be any particular place. And so you can kind of fill those in the places that you don't, use those to fill the empty space between the geographical points. So I had this kind of list of different subjects and sort of strung them out to make this kind of narrative.
So did you kind of started with, you had a route in mind essentially, and then prior to kind of writing down anything, just first got in place the physical locations, and then thought, okay,
yeah, just to see if it was even possible to have enough locations that would make sense to go to, and it turned out there was definitely enough, and I was able to find quite a few more too. And then some of the locations are not Prince related exactly; they're just sort of general Minneapolis, but a lot of them are, because he spent so much time down there, and just it was the center of the city in the 80s. I mean, still kind of is, but it just like is so heavily associated with Prince, and he filmed a ton of Purple Rain down there, and was just down there all the time. So it proved a pretty rich ground for that.
And then did you end up walking the route before even beginning to map it out, just to get a sense, or did you first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I actually got this book that this guy wrote. It's called like Purple Rain. That lists a lot of that was one of the things that I did for research, and then I read this book, Let's Go Crazy, which is an awesome book about the making of Purple Rain, and the whole thing. It just is a really good read. And I also read this book by a guy I know who knew Prince, and it's called This Thing Called Life by Neil Carlin. And using those kind of three things, I was able to pick out more points that were important down there, like the balcony scene in Purple Rain that's kind of early in the movie. The original guitar store where Prince bought his first like Axe guitars, the building is still there. Glam Slam, the club that he owned in the 90s, is just on the mark, or just on the, was just like one street off. And then so I was able to, those are kind of the main Prince related areas. And then just as I was finalizing the tour, the city had this what do you call them, like street artist Jairo Vega come in and make this huge mural of Prince right down like a block. It was like literally the tour originally, see where Gary has it, the tour originally went up, went straight, and then left the other way around the block. And so the mural is right there on that corner. So I just, at the very last minute, I had to rewrote the tour and write this thing. And it was amazing. I was he was just starting it as I was doing like a final test on the tour. And I was like, oh man, this is going to take forever. And, but he finished it in like 3 days. It was incredible. It was just amazing to see. And so it was cool. I was able to incorporate that into the tour as well.
That's the cover image of the tour. Show people.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So that's a part of it. It's a huge mural. And so you had your route mapped out, and then in terms of writing the script, was it kind of a process, or did it come pretty quickly from that period on?
No, it was. I mean, I'm maybe not the most efficient like worker and researcher, but it took me like a long time to research these things because, I mean, almost every point is like a little bit of a research project. Some of them are pretty simple stories, but you want to have things right as far as, or I like to make sure I get everything right. And so all the details of like the Purple Rain movie, I had to make sure I had those right. The history of the music wall, I had to do that. Some of the information about like the Minneapolis sound, which is the kind of particular genre that came out of Minneapolis in that time, I had to research. And so each one of these is, kind of turns out to be a little bit of a research project, and just to make sure everything's right. And then, for every 300 words that you write, you have like 5 or 6 or 7 that you throw away. And so it ends up being, it took a long time, but I think that's just the way, for me anyways, that I have to do things to get like the quality where I want it. You just end up throwing a lot of stuff away to get to the good stuff. And so it did take me a long time to research those. Other tours are not quite as intensive. The Minneapolis, the Riverwalk tour was kind of like that, because a lot of the place are unrelated, and also actually Minneapolis one was a little bit like that. But with the Prince one especially, I wanted to make sure that I had things right, because there's so many. Prince is like such a big deal. There's so many fans that know everything about him, and if you get it wrong, then you're gonna pay the price for that.
Exactly.
So
you've been in the Prince.
I actually had Neil, who wrote the thing called Lifebook, go through the tour and let me know if anything was off, and he didn't see anything. And then I had another guy who calls himself Crippled Kurt take the tour, and he when I was actually on his like sort of YouTube podcast, and he loved it, and there was actually, I was gratified because there were some things in there that he didn't even know about Prince, so that made me feel good as well.
Nice. I'm going to say one of the things I really liked about the tour, I think it's a great example of using the physical space. Obviously, there's physical locations that tie to the story. There's a kind of narrative thread through that. But I think your reminiscences on Prince as from a city's point of view, and then from also a personal point of view, really just has this great glue that kind of ties the whole tour together. It's not just this is where Prince did that, this is where he did that. You kind of provide this personal context. It's like, it's your journey, it's writer's journey through kind of almost growing up listening to Prince and the effect it had on you, which also kind of, you can overlay that onto the city itself and what he kind of meant. And I think at the end of the tour, you know a bit more about Prince, but you also know a bit more about Frank, the writer, and about Minneapolis, the city, and kind of connection. How the city's been shaped by that, which I think is really nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was my goal, and it's with something like this tour is definitely the most personal one. I mean, I just did also a tour of Bologna where I was an exchange student, and that's has maybe a little more similar personal vein to it than like kind of historical, but I don't know. I think those opportunities, especially if a place means something to you, you need to take that chance to explain to the listener why, and to make it helps kind of make it mean something to them as well.
And in terms of once you've kind of written it, I know you do a test with the use a text to speech feature where you can save each location with kind of robotic audio voice, fairly realistic. When you'd actually gone and walked it that first time, did it click, or did it feel like, oh, whoa, this is actually not as some things are not what I thought it would be on the ground?
No, I had to do it a few times because some of the buildings would screw stuff up, and so like the triggering was off, and then some of the like distances were not quite what I thought they should be, and so I had to go back. So I wrote it, put it in, did that test, went down and like tested it again, and then and then I had to adjust stuff and like trim some things and move the points around a little bit, and I think I had to do that like twice just because there's some of the things weren't quite working. And it's hard to know when you get into a city with tall buildings, they mess up the GPS a little bit, and so it's hard to know if it's just a quirk of that time that you're doing it or if it's going to happen like every time. So that's why I wanted to do it a few times to make sure it was like within the range of actually working.
Yeah, I can see in some of these the sections of Nicolette More where it's quite closed in. We made the locations much larger to occasionally with small spaces and large buildings up around you. You get some GPS bounce, and which means your phone might think you're a little bit off track than where you actually are. So we can compensate for that after testing, which is why testing is so useful. Especially testing with the text to speech, so you don't have to go and record a whole script. We can then adjust for that afterwards.
Yeah, I was a little worried, just given that experience. I was a little worried when because we went to Bologna in December, and I wrote the tour ahead of time and put it all in, and then I was going to test it while I was there, and I was kind of worried I wouldn't have enough tries to make it right, but it actually worked better than I thought it was going to, especially with the porticos and stuff that you're under. I was a little nervous that would mess up the GPS too, but it seemed like it went pretty well. So
brilliant. And so how did you find working with the VoiceMap editor? Did you find it added value?
Meaning you, or meaning the technology?
I guess so meaning myself, or in the case of Ben, my colleague you worked with on Bologna, just the experience of working collaboratively. Did you find it began well, or was it?
Yeah. Well, you did a great job. So thank you. That was really super professional and really high quality work. So thank you for that. And Ben too was great to work with. He had a lot of good suggestions for making the tour work better. And I mean, I'm used to working with editors. I've been a freelance writer for 20, 30 years. And, so it's not like a new thing for me. But with this, I think it's like really important because I don't know exactly how the technology works. I don't know what needs to happen when, and with the there's a lot of directional things that you need to happen, how you can stack different locations on each other and that sort of thing. And so, especially for my first tour, like I was learning all that and didn't really know how it worked. And so it was great to have that editor to help sort of guide along that path.
Yeah, we always going to stress as editors that we're not here to edit someone's content. If we think there's some feedback we can give on that, it's really just to make sure that it works as an audio tour. So we try and do it with a fairly light touch, but with an eye to making sure that it flows well, and that things trigger at the right time, so that people can just focus on the story essentially.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately you want the listener to have like the best possible experience. So if you guys are helping that happen, then that's good for everybody.
And so then now you'd finish writing it, you ready to record it. How did you find recording as someone who maybe doesn't come from a background or has recorded yourself as pretty much 99% of the publishers that we've dealt with are in that same boat?
Yeah, that was definitely a learning on the deck type thing. It was hard enough. We talked about before, I wasn't sure like how much I needed in a take and stuff, and So it took me quite a few takes to get and I was doing it like paragraph by paragraph. I know other people do it like kind of in one take. But I personally like to kind of, and I forgot to mention this the other day when we were talking, I like to like re-listen to it and make sure it sounds exactly like I want it to. And so that's one of the reasons why I was doing it paragraph by paragraph, so I can go over and make sure it is hitting the kind of exact notes that I want to. So for me, it's a little bit labor intensive, but I think like to think that it shows in the quality of the tour, and I use, I have like a field recorder that I use, this Tascam thing. So it's good quality and it's kind of big files and stuff, but and it's this thing, it's sort of semi-professional quality. But I think other people use their phones and stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah, pretty much 98% of publishers use their phones. We can kind of make the quality sound well. We go through a few iterations of getting samples from people. Also, a side note, as I was telling Frank when we chatted last week, the software is getting much better to improve audio. So going forward, I think, that'll make the publishers' lives and our lives simpler in terms of working with maybe slightly subpar audio that can be turned into, something really well. What's always kind of can take a bit of back and forth, even when you give some examples, is the delivery of kind of sounding natural. I think Frank did a great job of just sounding quite conversational, quite authentic, and, not like this is the tour of Prince, and, it's this kind of very removed narrator. It sounds like he's kind of, he's getting to know you and you're getting to know him, and he's taking you around the city that he really loves, and it comes through in that. And so I think that we do spend a bit of time trying to get that out of publishers, to make sure it's like, you want to be comfortable. You don't want it to feel this too forced or too stiff delivery. And some people get it first time, some people will take a few tries. But I think that's always the goal we go for, is this kind of authenticity. And people know when it feels authentic, when it sounds authentic, ultimately.
Yeah, and I do try to add more voice modulation or voice fluctuation than I usually use in my speaking, just because I know it makes it easier for people to pay attention. I mean, you don't want it to be super exaggerated, but the more higher and lower your pitches are, the more engaged the listener is. So that's something that I try to do when I'm recording.
And I thought I didn't want to delve too much, as this isn't really as much a kind of technical how-to. In terms of when you were mapping, Frank, did you draw out the route line first and then started populating the route with locations?
No, I don't. I think I don't really remember. I think I was mapping it out in my head, and then probably went downtown and rode it on my bike to see if it made sense, or if like you could actually do it before I put it into the system. But like with the Bologna tour, I just mapped it on the software, and then obviously did it later. And what I also did for that one was use Google Street View, which was really helpful to kind of walk the route virtually. And
yeah,
but you also want to do it in person to make sure everything's up to date.
Yeah, makes sense. And just so for those of you who may be unsure, Google Street View is if you drag the little yellow man, drop in here, and then essentially allows us editors to kind of help build these tours, in my case, sitting in Cape Town, very far from it, called Minneapolis, and able to put it together. So very, very, very useful for both publishers and for the editors.
Yeah. No, I didn't actually realize that was in the thing. I just used it on a separate window. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. And I was wondering, I kind of know the answer already as we've talked about it, but did you ever delve into the tutorial documentation? I know you kind of just dive in and figure it out yourself a bit.
I think when I did my first tour, I kind of read through it, but I'm not like always so great at reading directions. So I was more of a figuring it out as I go. And then when I would run into a specific problem, I would like email you and you'd send me that page that explained it and kind of go through it that way. So I didn't lean very heavily on it, but I probably should have, would have gone maybe slightly more smoothly, but now I kind of know how it works and don't need it quite as much.
Yeah, with an old hands now.
Yeah.
And was there any part that you found kind of particularly challenging, or and then also on that, did the tour take much longer than you imagined it would
have? Well, it's just not quite as. No, I mean, well, the first tour I did was like, I could not believe how long it was taking and how much work it was, and I was like, I'm never gonna do this again. But then by the time I got it finished, I was really happy with it, and I mean, this happens with a lot of big projects where you're like, by the time you get done with it, you're like, don't ever want to have anything to do with it again. But then, as I started thinking about it, I started realizing some things that I could do to make it go faster and be easier. And but probably the hardest thing is just it's not like a straightforward process where you just do this and do this and do this. It's kind of recursive because you got to like figure out the route and then figure out the script and figure out how many words you have and then write it and then rewrite it and then test it and record it and then re-record it. So it's like it can feel like you're not making any progress for a while. But for me, that's probably the hardest part. I mean, there's nothing individually that's hard. It's just like there's so many moving pieces to put together to get to the kind of the finish line. That's probably the hardest thing for me.
Do you feel coming at it as a writer, it gives you a different perspective? I mean, and some people are come as tour guides, some people come as photographers next. Do you feel like it gave you much of an edge, or were you still kind of very new territory for you?
I don't know. I didn't really think about that. Probably just in the researching and the actual writing of the individual things. Like I really focused on each piece as like a story and an essay, and tried to make sure that that's what I'm doing in this tour is like everything, not just like giving people facts. I'm like giving them facts in a little story, So all in almost every module, there's some sort of mini narrative, that takes place, and that's just like that's how people's minds work, and B, it's just more interesting than just like there's that, and than just a bunch of facts that you can't remember that are out of context. So, so that's probably in the line writing. Maybe I would have a slight advantage over other people just because I've been doing that for so long. And in the research, maybe in finding interesting things. But I mean, with the other stuff, I would just be like everybody else.
Yeah, I think this is, and what we're trying to aim for all the tours is kind of this narrative threads, a bit of an arc, and then also, thinking of each stop as a kind of vignette that's connected to the last and to the next one, and that you can kind of trace these moving vignettes through the route line of the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like a book, where you want each piece to be a chapter, but you want the whole thing to feel like a story. And so at the end, people are coming around to some sense of completion or some sense of like the end of the narrative, whether that's circling back around to the beginning of the story or where it's just sort of some kind of ending that you come up with. But you want people to feel like they've gone through this thing, this kind of journey, and now it's like ending. And the other thing we talked about, as far as just advice or what I try to do is I try to make my tours very like historical and I don't try to not mention any businesses that are there now or anything, because those could be gone in 2 years and then I'd have to update it, and so I try to keep it as focused on like history as possible. So ideally, I mean, you always have to update a little bit, but like I want to do that as little as possible, and so I try to, that's why I try to keep them mostly all, like basically all with things that are in the past and are not going to change.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. I was saying it's, when possible, try and future-proof the tour. Because as Frank was saying, businesses are going to come and go, shops will come and go, and it can be, what you think might be there forever might not be. Some of the tours we have that are kind of more restaurant focused, food focused. So in Madrid, we have a tour where they've focused on places that have been around for hundreds of years. So the hope is that those restaurants won't close. They're some of the oldest restaurants in Spain. But, if you're doing a kind of tour of the hottest restaurants of X, know that you're probably going to be putting in a fair bit of work for yourself in the future to keep up to date with that.
Yeah, even in the Bologna tour, there's a corner that I went to that has a pharmacy on it. And if you look at pictures from 100 years ago, there was still a pharmacy there. So, but I tried to even qualify that as saying there has been a pharmacy on here for at least 100 years, and there may still be when you get here, so that if there's not, it still works.
Yeah. And so, but start winding it down. Did you enjoy the overall process? Are you happy with the Prince tour? Looking back on it now,
no, I feel like the Prince tour is great, and like I was really happy with it, and people who've done it really love it. So yeah, I was very happy with how that turned out.
And then I know you've kind of just dropped some pieces of advice now. Was there anything before we can move into the question phase? Any kind of other particular advice you'd give to potential creators or publishers, getting started now?
I think those are kind of the main two things. Is focus on like storytelling, like keep things in like anecdotal and narrative form, like and don't be afraid to put yourself in there in a way that if things are meaningful to you and that'll make them more meaningful to other people, and then also the try to keep it as non-perishable as possible with that, keeping it based in like history. That's my main piece of advice.
Yeah, those are very, very good. It's very useful. And I thought it would be nice if you had a kind of favorite paragraph or passage from the tour, that it might be nice to just kind of briefly read. People can read the scripts online if they want, and then obviously you can preview the audio for the first 3 locations. And by Frank's tour, it would be obviously appreciated for him. But yeah, if there was a specific piece that you kind of really stuck with.
Yeah, so at the end of the Prince tour, it starts in kind of in that main area where Purple Rain was filmed, and down in the very last stop on the tour is the guitar shop where Prince and his friends would play on guitars, and so I closed there, and it was a nice opportunity to be able to circle back to some things. If you go to Paisley Park, which is Prince's like home and studio, there's they show this blue notebook where he kind of originally wrote the script for Purple Rain, and you could see indented on the notebook, it says the title of the film was Dreams. And so I just thought that was a great kind of leitmotif to put in the tour, because that's in a sense is what this tour is all about. This kid who had this crazy dream to be a star and just created this thing out of nothing, and not out of nothing, but like in some sense. So this is the last piece. It's literally called the guitar shop. As I said, stop at this alley and look across the street. There at 417 First Avenue, you'll see a brick building with an ornate, classic pointed arch over the main door. That, in some sense, is where this all started. In 1975, that building was the original site of the guitar shop, which was owned by a luthier named Chuck Orr. It was here, just a few blocks down the street from where he would rise to fame, that Prince and his friends, Andre Anderson, later known as Andre Simone, and Des Dickerson would hang out, jam on guitars, and dream about what they could do and who they might become. Sometimes Chuck would close the store to let them play. Orr was Prince's first luthier and made him a white electric axe guitar that you can see in his video for 1979's Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad. In the same video, Simone and Dickerson are on stage with Prince just a few years after they hung around the guitar shop together. The shop is gone, Prince is gone, but his story remains. And this might be the place to consider what Prince's story was about. It was about music, it was about ambition, it was about genius, but most of all, like it said on the cover of that blue notebook, Prince's story, above everything else, was about dreams. And that's kind of the end of the tour.
Yeah, it's awesome. Really, really like that. Thanks, Frank. That was really cool and really insightful for me and hopefully for everyone else. And then I thought, if anyone has any questions for Frank, myself, any thoughts on that, we'll open up the floor. If you do, you just click the little raise hand button and then we'll know you want to answer a question. And happy to answer anything.
Yeah, happy to too.
And Christina. Yeah.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, and then
All right.
we'll get to you afterwards.
Yeah, I changed rooms. So just want to thank you. Just in the beginning, this was so fruitful. I'm going to come in from another angle. I'm not going to say anything about that, but this was really inspirational for me, and also having a writer so experienced. So thank you very much, and also to you, Gary, for this seminar. It was really fruitful, and I don't think I have any questions. I just thought the ending is wonderful, and I'll go right in there and use your tour as inspiration when I start out on doing my stuff.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Yeah, that was the intention, so that works.
Yeah, you can do the tour virtually, and I had some good photos in there, and I got some photos of like Paisley Park and some things that are kind of not on the tour but are related to it. Like there's this photo of Prince's editing studio, and there's a photo of First Avenue the night Prince died, and then the streets filled with people.
Yeah, so some of the photos are just obviously kind of linked to the sites, but then also some photos that are useful for people to get an idea of what, for example, the Paisley Park looked like. That's a reference point. So it's
yeah, and I got those from the Minneapolis Tourism Bureau. They're kind of owned by Paisley Park, but then the tourism office has like media photos that you can use if you give credit to them, and so that was a kind of Prince's estate is notoriously proprietary about stuff, and so that was kind of a nice way that I could actually get some photos of Paisley Park and those kind of things. But also I got photos from other tourist offices too for that. They usually have some high quality things that you can use.
Thanks, Christina. And then so Andrew, leave you up next.
Hello, is that working?
Yes.
Okay. That Frank joined this in I lived in the Caltech College, so this is
Okay.
hometown of sports. So this tour looks great. I look forward to taking it next time I'm back. My question is from the practical side of marketing and promotion. I'm an author as well. It sounds like you might have a publisher that was available to help. Rob, just you tell me, how are you handling the marketing and promotion for the Prince tour and your other tours as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, VoiceMap does a good job on the SEO side, and so a lot of people come to it through that, and then they have partnerships through TripAdvisor. You can get your tour on TripAdvisor and Viator and some other sites like that. So that's helpful. But as far as the local marketing side, I've been a little bit trying to figure that out. There are some like where my Minneapolis the downtown Riverwalk tour starts. It's at the Open Book Center, which is where the loft and all these writing places are, and people go there to start it. And so I had them put up posters. VoiceMap will give you, or it can make you like a poster of your tour, which I think I need to get those updated because I raised the price on a couple of them by $1. But so you can get those and print those out. I also made, so like I bought this little like acrylic thing, and I'm going to try to have some local businesses have it. It's got the QR code on there. And so that's one way. I also have cards. I had some cards like made. So this is the Prince one, which you can see it very well. It's kind of, and then it's got the QR code on the back. We made those through like Vistaprint, I think, and so those have actually worked pretty well. Just to leave those out at some businesses. I haven't figured out. I was trying to figure out how to reach like those sort of target audiences online. I just a couple of days ago set up a Facebook page that says like Minneapolis audio tours, just to try to capture a little. And I haven't quite figured out how to leverage that. But and then I don't know, like I was gonna, when I get a few more tours out, I was gonna approach some local media and like just the neighborhood papers and stuff to try to see if I can get those. And there's opportunities for bulk selling with some places, but I haven't had anybody. I've asked a couple of people if they want to do that, but they all think it seems like too complicated or something. And so I have to figure out how to make that kind of easy for people to do. So those are some of the ways that I've done, and also then just like the normal stuff that half works, like putting stuff on LinkedIn and whatever your social media. I have a newsletter that I send out just a couple times a year of stuff I've done on Substack, and so I put them on there too. And but it's all not very like, it's not like a super well thought out marketing plan at this point. It's just trying to figure out how to get. It's just I'm not like a marketer, so I'm trying to figure it out.
Yes, and so as Frank mentioned, we list tours in TripAdvisor and get your by third-party resellers. We see a lot of sales from that. And then tours, each location, something we added fairly new. Each location on the tour can have its own QR code. So if you're able to put these up somewhere with permission for you doing it, someone can scan that QR code. It will take them to that location on the tour. If it's a paid tour, you then have the option to buy that tour and to take it. So it's kind of just an interesting way to get people excited about the tour. And then Frank was also mentioning selling tours using voucher codes. What that is, for those of you who don't know, is essentially the tour can be bought on a website. You can see buy now. You can do the same in the app, but then you can also redeem the tour using a voucher code, 8 characters, 8 digits that you enter into the app to redeem the tour. And with that method, you can also sell tours through other third parties. So maybe, it's a bookstore where the tour starts, or a restaurant that's on the tour. If you get in touch with them and they're interested, they can sell copies of your tour right there, or tourism bureau or something like that. They can sell copies of that tour in person to people coming physically. That could be done with maybe something, a nice physical display, or maybe a postcard or something that comes. And it's just a short set of instructions on how to redeem the tour. We try and make it as easy as possible. It's always something that we're looking at improving, but there's different ways the tour can kind of be distributed, essentially.
And before I forget, Andrew, my wife just started teaching in McAllister, so that's right. Yeah.
Cool. And so thanks, Andrew. And then Celine, so you're interested. You have a question.
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed that. And I have to also echo the sentiment that ending on the tour, it gave me goosebumps when you were reading it. I'm a massive Prince fan. I have, as I explained to Gary, I joined this tour, this webinar to understand, VoiceMap and the self-guided tour space. I am a journalist. I write for a publication called Skift. So I'd love to understand how you made that decision to, how did you find VoiceMap? What made you opt for a self-guided, recorded tour as opposed to doing, a proper guided tour business?
Well, like I said earlier, Gary approached me, and so I think we maybe talked about it online, and I was to kind of figure out what it is, how it works, and stuff, and then I decided that it might be worth a try, and it's just I'm a self-employed freelancer, so you're always and one of the disadvantages of VoiceMap compared to other publications is you don't get money until the tour sells. Whereas if you write a magazine story, you get money up front, and then you write the story, which has its advantages. But the potentially more long-term advantage of VoiceMap is that the tours sit there and give you passive income for a good amount of time. So over time, they will be worth it. So I'm sort of always looking for. It's just it was kind of an interesting project. B is kind of a you get sort of bored, especially in travel writing, doing the same thing over and over again. Because it's and so this was like a new way to just create a cool experience for somebody, and so it was partly fun and partly business and partly getting into this new space in a way that I think has a lot of potential.
Sure. When you contextualize it from that perspective of passive income, and it's something that you're really skilled at in terms of storytelling and then amplifying your freelance niche, that makes a lot of sense. Are there any other challenges? So it sounds like you've got to put your, a marketing strategy behind that. Are there any challenges that you have advice over and above? I noted that you mentioned the storytelling and all of that, but in terms of somebody thinking about opting for the self-guided space, that you have advice on that?
I don't know. I mean, you have to. I mean, there are all kinds of creative ways, I think, to do it, but you have to also focus on a place where there's going to be enough people to make sense. So it has to be a certain density of foot traffic or driving traffic if you're doing a driving tour or whatever. So when you're thinking about your tour, you want to think about like the route that what a person can walk, and also if there's going to be like enough people there for it to make sense, for you to. And then thirdly, what kind of experience you're walking the hang of the place is, and what it means to you, and what kind of story you can tell there, and so you want to A, have a lot of people, B, have it maybe a route that makes sense, and C, be a cool story or a cool bunch of stories that you're going to be taking somebody through. And so I mean, I think there's a lot of creative ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be like the Trevi Fountain or something like that, I mean, that's great, but like I'm doing this in sort of non-touristy places, where there's not a lot of competition, so it's not a lot of voices at this point for competing for that kind of things. I mean, Minneapolis is kind of a mid-level city. Bologna also is like not very touristy. Bologna, Italy, and so there's not a lot of that kind of thing going on there, but there are tourists there. Also, I'm currently doing putting together a tour of Madison, Wisconsin, which is another one of those kind of mid-sized city where there's a lot of people come in the summer and for school and stuff, and Duluth, Minnesota, which is a big tourist city in the summer, and there's nothing like that up there. So thinking about that in terms of the I don't know. I mean, I don't obviously have a little bit of a choice because I live here, but those I think those kind of mid-level markets are can be good.
Okay. That makes
Yes, I think echoing Frank's, a route line is clearly important. When I did a tour that I helped together in Coimbra in Portugal last year, and I got a chance to do it, I thought it was a great tour. The story was great. I knew it from obviously working on it. But honestly, the route itself was kind of the biggest takeaway from it, beyond the kind of interesting little facts I've thought and heard on it, and the stories, the way the storyteller told it. The route kind of was a route I would never have taken otherwise. And so I think, don't just think of it as like, what information can I get across to people? That's part of it, but also where can I take people while I'm telling them that? And those two kind of should have equal weight, essentially, because if you end up taking someone down a road or an alley that they wouldn't have gone otherwise, that is such a visual memory, the audio and the visual together, just going through this really makes a kind of striking impression on people. And if the content is kind of really fits the moment, it becomes something they will actually remember. It sounds cheesy like that, but it can really make an impression. I think there's something very serendipitous about it. So I would always say, think of the route as its own thing, and how it ties in with the content. But don't just kind of throw in a route and then so that you have a reason to put content. And they're both really important. And where you start the tour and where you end the tour is also something to consider. Technically, do people want to do a circular route? Does it make sense to do it more linear? Linear fashion. So it depends. And then also having an angle, in case you're exploring Minneapolis through the eyes of Prince, who's someone who grew up listening to Prince and what that means. A city like London can be many different ways. We've got something like 70 tours there now, and people often say, is there still more you can write about? And it's like, of course there is. You can write about a city through many different lenses. And so I think finding an interesting lens is always going to be quite exciting and challenging.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe where you follow your interests, and if there's some little niche thing that about that is interesting to you, it might be cool to build a tour around that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Donnell.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes. Yes.
One of the things that interesting, very great presentation, lots of really useful information. One of the things that I found interesting, I guess, is you've done more than one tour now. Did you have in your mind that kind of duration, say, well, this tour should be an hour or 2 hours, and if it's 2 hours, it should be 20 locations, or or I have 20 locations, and that's going to take somebody 2 hours or 1 hour. Did you come at it from a locations, or that, was there locations that kind of planned that, or kind of that drove the duration, or was it the other way? You say, well, I think I could do something for 2 hours, give somebody a 2 hour block of time, an interesting journey in that 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a mix. I mean, it's obviously dependent on the places that you have on your tour, but also, I don't know. I think 2 hours is too much for me. I try to keep mine around an hour. My Minnehaha Falls tour is like 45 minutes, which is, I don't know, it almost feels a little bit short, but, then the Prince tour runs a little bit over, maybe it's like I don't know, between an hour and a half, depending on how long people take and stuff. And so I don't know, it's a little bit of a case by case basis, but I try to shoot for about an hour, which I think is like the time that people want to take, and it just like the value for their money, and it's a good amount of time for like an immersive experience, but it's not like it doesn't take all morning or whatever, so they can go do other stuff. But like you can also like like my Bologna tour, there's certain places where the person is moving, and you don't want it to be too quiet for too long, and so you pick like a small subject to talk about, like the canals or something, or the university that or something like that doesn't take a lot of time. But then there's other places like there's this in the main church. There was for like 3 years this statue by Michelangelo. It was like his biggest statue ever that was only there for like 3 years, and it's this great story where the city like took it down after 3 years and melted it into a cannon. And so I had people just when you have like a story that doesn't kind of fit into the walking part, you can have them like stop and listen to that for a bit. But you don't want to. I mean, it just depends on what you want to say, and sometimes in order to keep things moving, you got to cut it short. Because you just don't want the person to get bored or feel like they're just like not making any progress too.
Do you find, or in some of your tours, where that as I'm kind of designing, so my first one is that some locations have a lot of information, but you want a lot of things to see, in very close up, and then other locations are, come here, see this. This is what you see at this location. So, do you treat those differently as you're thinking about your script, where you kind of hit a location and you've got like within that location, there's say 5 things I want to be able to, different things I want you to go see within 10 yards of where you are, and you can't remember that as set points because it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to take them on a case by case basis and see what the merits are of the versus the time spent. Like there are things that I had to cut out of the Prince tour that just didn't fit or didn't have time to fit, or they were too far. There's a record shop that in Minneapolis that everybody associates with Prince, and he loved it. He went there like 3 days before he died, and bought a bunch of records. But it's just, you just can't have it. So it's really, you really, I think, have to focus on the crafting the experience for the person, and how good of a story it is, weighing how good of a story it is, how far off the path it is, how much worth it is going there. And you can also like suggest, like in my Bologna tour, there's the Ark of St. Dominic is not on the tour, but and a couple other things, I'm like, you can go, if you want to go look at that, you can go look at it after the tour, and it's in this place, just to let them know about it. But I think unless you have like a really compelling piece of narrative or story, you kind of want to keep them moving.
Yeah, I would. I'd echo that. We always try and tell people. So, firstly, try to be entertaining, not exhaustive. It's I avoid stopping people constantly. It depends on the routes, and if it is going to be everywhere you are, kind of, it takes place in a very small space, maybe a small village, and there's more stops than usual. You manage their expectations by that, but for general kind of city routes, we try and keep people moving when possible. People taking information better while they're walking. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to get less distracted. And then try not, when you do stop them, not stopping them for too long, too extended periods of time, but maybe then picking spots along the way. So maybe, walking for a period, and then there's a nice spot where they can take a seat for a moment, and you can kind of get more into the content of that particular stage, and let them kind of take a rest, maybe a halfway point. So I think it's always good to manage people's expectations about what they can expect, but try and keep people moving where possible. And at the end of the day, they're not going to remember every fact you told them, every date, so we always try and stress as editors to avoid writing like that with this kind of heavy, date, not historical date. What was that?
Let me go.
Sorry, feedback. It's hard.
So I always recommend being more entertaining than exhaustive. Also, I think you got your mic on, maybe. I know. No, it's picking me up. You need to unmute it. Unmute fine.
I think you guys are both muted.
Sorry, that's absolutely right. I just muted mine because Donnell was getting a bit of feedback from me. But yeah, so the point I'm saying is, trying to keep it entertaining, essentially. You don't want to lumber people with just this amount of, so when they finish doing this tour, they kind of feel overwhelmed by the info. And so we always recommend, trying to keep people moving when possible, giving them opportunities to take a break. They can resume the tour when they like, end the tour and resume it when they like. So, it's good to point out spots where it's nice to say, okay, if you want to go take a break here, grab something to eat or have a look around or in a park or something like that, then this is a good opportunity to do that. But to answer your question in terms of duration of tours, so if you see here, Frank's tour, it says 28 minutes, 1.5 miles, which is about 2 and a bit kilometers. It's obviously taking place in a bit more of a compact space in downtown. This number is just if the listener walked the tour from start to finish without stopping. Obviously, with stops along the way, the tour extends. And so Frank's tour, actually, we have the duration is 75 minutes because, that's a better idea of what the tour will actually, how long it will actually take when someone's out doing it, taking into account stopping, so it gives people a better way to manage their expectations of the time that they're going to spend on the tour. The content of the tour might be 40 minutes, but realistically, it's going to take them an hour or an hour, but to actually do the tour. Usually, it's not a hard rule, but it's usually about 2/3 of the tour will have all the content on it. And so you always want to have silence as well. You never want to have kind of wall-to-wall talking throughout the whole tour. People need some space to take in what you're saying, maybe talk to the people they're doing the tour with. So we always recommend, and the editor can help with that. Say, okay, well, this section of locations has a lot of content. Let's give them some space here. Maybe you don't have as much to say on this stretch. Just let them know, hey, I'll catch up with you in a minute or so at the end of the block or something like that. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. But this is, it's always going to be a case by case. The editor's job is to kind of work with you on the tour and say, okay, what will work in this particular scenario, using the kind of what we've learned from working on this 100 of tours. It's now we published 1,000 tours, so yeah, so we'll take that knowledge and put it to good use for your tour.
Yeah, and just to echo that, I mean, people are much more likely to remember a story that you tell them than a list of facts that are kind of decontextualized.
Yeah, and just to add on that, walkie tours, GPS audio tours, people are in the here and now. They're looking at something that you're talking about. They're not sitting there and reading it in a guidebook. So we always, encourage writers, publishers to not write removed, like the listener isn't sitting at home on the couch reading this. They're looking at something. So engage them, point out details, draw their attention to things, orientate them, act as if you're kind of standing there with them, and they will feel like you are, essentially, and they will feel, more immersed in the story. It helps with just kind of them allowing to go on this journey, essentially, with you. Anyone else got any questions? Otherwise, I think we wrap it up.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and good luck with your tours.